To talk about absolutism, I think it's helpful to begin with the philosophical backings of absolutism. Since it's such a foreign concept to us in our modern day and age, it's helpful to realize why people were promoting this type of government. And to get at that, I want to talk about two philosophers, two backers of absolutism. The first is Thomas Hobbes. He was a man who lived during an age of horrible conflict across Europe, and he believed that man, when left to his own devices, created lives that were poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And given that, given the conflict he saw, given the horrors of war that he saw, he felt that the only solution to the problems of humanity meant that you needed to create a strong government. You needed to create a powerful force that had the capability of restraining man's natural inclination towards violence and discord. In his work, The Leviathan, which he took the title off of the mythical beast of the Bible, strong, powerful beast of the Bible, he believed that royal authority should be so powerful that it would be able to compel men to, if you will, be better than they truly were. That to preserve the peace, you needed a strong, powerful state capable of resisting man's natural inclination towards violence. The second backer that matters for the purposes of France is Bishop Bossuet, the tutor of Louis XIV. He was a proponent of the principle of divine right. The principle of divine right was functionally that since God had appointed the king and had put the king on the throne, therefore any resistance of the king was by extension questioning of God. In this, it was a linkage of the church and the state in terms of linking the rationale for absolutist rule to proper Christian belief. These ideals found their fulfillment in the form and in the person of King Louis XIV. Called himself the Sun King, and here you see him striking a strong, powerful, and imposing figure. And he was one who believed deeply in the principles of absolutism, tried to centralize authority all around him, and he was a strong proponent of linking the church to the state, carrying forward that idea of divine right. A good example of this is his revocation of the Edict of Nantes. This edict had been passed to give toleration to French Calvinists, and he revoked it and started taking public action against French Calvinists in order to try and pressure them to simply leave the country and ensure that he had only a strong religious majority of Catholics within his country, who of course would recognize that the Catholic Church supported the king and his rule. Now, in addition to the king trying to centralize the state around himself, the famous phrase, "L'État c'est moi," I am the state, Louis recognized that to rule his state absolutely, he did need, if you will, help. And a good example of that is the development of bureaucracy under his state. The term bureaucracy is actually coined during this period. It's French, it's bureau, deskocracy, the Greek for power of, and so it's functionally the power of the desk. Those who are appointed by the state represent the state and thus are accorded power. A good example of this playing out, a good example of bureaucracy playing out is Louis XIV's Minister of Finance, Jean-Baptiste Colbert. He was a strong proponent of the principles of mercantilism, of the state involvement in boosting economic output, and he got involved in any number of affairs of promoting monopolies, subsidies to certain French industries, all about trying to increase the tax revenue, increase the economic output of the French state. And the reason that Colbert is doing this is the purposes for which Louis XIV wants so much of this money. Namely, Louis XIV wants the money because he needs to go to war, and he does it so often. Now, here are the major wars of Louis XIV. I'm not going to go through each one of them in detail, but just a sense of how these wars go. The War of Devolution is a fight over claims over the Spanish Netherlands, and the French try and lay claim to it. And functionally, the war ends with a little bit of status quo, except Louis gets a couple cities. In the Dutch War, Louis XIV attempts to take over the Netherlands. Louis wins the war by gaining some territory, but the Dutch, if you will, win more simply by the fact that they continue to exist. The War of the Grand Alliance is a long, bloody conflict as he tries to advance into German territory and is ultimately thwarted. And then finally the War of Spanish Succession, which is an attempt by Louis to put his grandson on the throne of Spain, which raises the fears of nearly everyone across Europe. Oh my gosh, you're going to link the powerful Spanish Empire with the powerful French Empire. This is something that we can't stand. And it leads to huge losses. And while Louis is able to put his grandson on the throne, it's tied to all sorts of agreements in terms of where he's not really gaining what he wanted. And more than that, there's a problem of the massive losses that he entailed. All these wars suck up the money that Colbert is building. All of these wars detract from sort of the early lead Louis XIV had taken in terms of building his state. At the outset of some of these wars, he had created the largest peacetime army in all of Europe. But by the end of these conflicts, he had not only not achieved most of his aims to achieve, as he saw it, the natural frontiers of France, he had also left a French state largely weaker, riddled with financial issues due to the losses of his war, and thus presented a picture where France, despite all of its strength at the outset of Louis's rule, indeed was in a position of greater financial difficulty, which was going to pose a significant problem and, unfortunately for France, a trend struggling with financial issues throughout the early period that we'll cover in this course.